Senator Ayotte.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank all of you for being here and for what you do to keep the country safe and for your leadership. And I wanted to start with a question for you, Secretary Johnson. We in New Hampshire are facing a public health epidemic with opioid and heroin abuse, and we've had a situation where we've had a 60% increase in drug deaths. And recently, Mr. Secretary, I know that you, thank you for reviewing the transcript of the hearing that we had, Senator Shaheen and I had in New Hampshire of this committee, which was where we had the CBP Commissioner Gil Kurlikowski there. We had the DEA Acting Administrator Jack Riley there and Director Botticelli from the Office of National Drug and Control Policy. So they testified, but also we heard from the police chief of our largest city, Nick Willard. And Chief Willard said something that I think is really important that's right in your wheelhouse, which is they had an arrest recently. They responded to a shooting in Manchester, and they had officers go into an apartment unknown to us previously. These are his words. And we found it to be a drug house. And from that, we did an investigation that led to Lawrence, Massachusetts, and from Lawrence, Massachusetts, directly to Mexico. So now we know that there's a Mexican drug cartel, the Sinaloa drug cartel, that is fueling heroin to the streets of Manchester, New Hampshire, and that's alarming. I would agree with Chief Willard. We know this is coming over the Mexican border. It's really cheap on our streets right now. And obviously, this is a very complex problem. There's some very strong bipartisan legislation we're working on here across the aisle. But Secretary Johnson, can you tell me what more we need to do to interdict more drugs, especially heroin, coming over from Mexico? And how are you working with Mexican authorities on this issue and also other departments, including the FBI, DEA, because this really is a public health epidemic?
Well, first, Senator, thank you for conducting that field hearing. I found the testimony and your remarks from that enlightening. And you've put the spotlight on a serious problem in New Hampshire. From my perspective, interdiction is the key. Interdiction at the southern border is the key. And what we've done within my department is devise our southern border campaign strategy, which is a consolidated strategic effort to bring to bear all the resources of my department on the single problem of border security, which includes people and narcotics. So that's not just CBP, it's also Immigration Customs Enforcement, HSI, and we are generally moving in the direction of a more coordinated strategy, which includes the DEA and other elements of our law enforcement. Eventually, I'd like to do the same thing on the northern border so that we are less stovepiped in our approach to both borders. And my hope is that at some point the Congress will codify our southern border campaign strategy into law and give us the additional resources we need to further work on this effort. But obviously interdiction is the key.
And Director Comey, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that we know that the people who are addicted, law enforcement's telling us, rightly so, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. But they want to focus on the kingpins. They want to focus on the cartels. We saw from Secretary Johnson what he just said, obviously the interdiction piece. But how's the FBI working to go after, for example, the kingpins of these enterprises that are really making the money off of it and providing, getting more and more people addicted, unfortunately, in our country?
The answer is working especially closely with DEA. Our strategy is focused on what we call transnational organized crime, so the big syndicates and the cartels, to do just what you said, to drive up the cost for them, to lock up them and their lieutenants, to make it harder for them to try to get drugs in, the interdiction being a separate piece of the strategy. And we're working hard at that every single day, but it is an enormous problem because of the shift you talked about.
Can I ask you, one of the issues that the chief raised and we talked about with the DEA, I just wanted to see if you had any insight on this. Chicago has an OCDEF model that they're working on, and I didn't know if the FBI understood was a part of that model, which really was bringing, so it has a sort of a partnership, as I understand it, DOJ, FBI, DEA, and local authorities. And our authorities were interested in, could we bring a similar model to work together along with the HIDTA task force in New Hampshire? And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that type of model.
Yeah, it's a model that I can't remember what the nearest OCDETF task force is to New Hampshire. Maybe one in Boston, I can't recall. But that's a huge feature of our work because drugs is not the Bureau's specialty, but we have certain capabilities that we can bring to bear. So we tend to bring it to bear in those task forces, which is both mostly OCDETF actually, and also HIDA's.
Well, I would ask you, because when I had Administrator Riley in New Hampshire, I would ask you, Director Comey, can you work with us on this? And Administrator Riley committed that from the DEA too, to see, just to make sure, and I will say that Chief Willard said that he's been really pleased with the help he's getting from the FBI, but looking at, are there better ways we can do this and make sure we're all working together in a cohesive fashion?
Sure, thank you.
I appreciate that.